Glen Raven is the maker of Sunbrella, and for the past 100 years, they've been providing leading edge textile solutions for home and outdoors. Now, today I'm really excited because we have Nick Luther, who is a product development engineer at Glen Raven. He's been working there for more than 6.5 years, and this is a really unique interview because based on the size of Glen Raven, he gets to work hands-on with a bunch of different products and solutions and gets to work with people from entry-level employees all the way up to vice presidents in the company. So make sure you stick around until the end of the episode because Nick is going to be giving us his biggest tip, which is really helpful for new engineers, people just starting their career. Let's jump into it. Nick, how are you doing today, man?
I'm doing good, Tony. Thanks for inviting me. This is really awesome.
Yeah, so we're really excited to jump into this interview. Our format is definitely more on the condensed side. We want to drive as much value as possible. So let's jump right into it. And okay, so first question is, what led you to the career pathway that you're in at Glen Raven?
It's really interesting because everybody asks the question of like, where did you make your career choice? Like, how did you end up here? And I think back to, was it in high school? Was it in college? Because everybody's asking you, like, what are you going to do when you grow up, right? Like, that's probably the most common question. And I think that the deciding moment, for me was probably in my junior year of high school. And my parents, there's a history of engineers in my family. So my dad was a mechanical engineer. My grandfather was a chemical engineer that worked at Seagram's. So I knew I wanted to be an engineer, but what type of engineer didn't really hit me until I was in my AP chemistry class. And I was like, oh, I actually kind of like playing with molecules and stuff. So, which is, not exactly what chemical engineers do, but some of them do. And I actually get to say that it's something I kind of do. So it was really that moment where you're meeting with your guidance counselor and you're applying for schools and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, this is where I want to go. And this is kind of what I want to do. And so then it's, all steam ahead into college, right?
Gotcha. So you knew from an early age, engineering is something that really clicked. You had a family of engineers. And so you didn't just, from what I understand, you didn't just start off working at Glen Raven. What actually led you to the path of getting there? What was your first kind of work experience, hands-on experience doing engineering?
Right. So, in engineering nowadays, one of the first things that you have to think about is like how you want, like the career path that you want. And the best way to get, down and dirty with it is to do a co-op or an internship over a summer. And so one of the things that I got to do was my sophomore year was applying for jobs as a co-op, and I landed a job actually in my hometown in Goose Creek, and got a job as at an aluminum smelter, Alcoa, and the job was like a process engineering job. So as a co-op, you spend your summers or a semester. So it's a working semester and then a school semester. So you alternate back and forth. So it essentially adds a whole year to your education process, but you're getting hands-on experience that you wouldn't have otherwise gotten. And so if you've never been around an aluminum mill, I will tell you that it is one of the hottest and dirtiest environments that I will probably ever come across. And it's in the low country of South Carolina, it's always humid, but then when you step inside of that plant, it's even hotter, and it's just dusty and dirty. And so it was going into work sometimes as early as 4 in the morning was not something I'd ever experienced as like in high school, or even your summer jobs. It's not something that I ever got to do. And then it's like, oh, is this what being an engineer is? Like, is it getting up early, just to dodge the heat of the sun of the day? And it was kind of like that moment where I was like, I really hope that this is not what the rest of my life is going to be like, because it's miserable.
Right. So you go into that first internship, you're in aluminum, you're like, this is not what I want to be doing. And so I think we were chatting earlier in the interview. This is something that's probably really important that engineers should think about. Is like, what's the core delineation of what that job is going to be doing? And aluminum definitely wasn't it for you. So the question then becomes, how did you end up getting into textiles?
When you're looking at the types of jobs, like it was, process engineering is a type of engineering that you can do. There's, you know, other types of engineering. And so I was looking at, internships to get into, to get into that summer. And I happened to, know someone that I ride with who was, a fairly senior member at Glen Raven, and he was like, well, we're looking for interns and I think you'd be a really good fit, because he knew me through cycling, and he was like, I know all of your background and all that kind of stuff, and I think you'd be a good fit. And so he recommended that I try out our R&D department, and that was kind of like the beginnings of what got me in there. Was because textiles is not something that most of the time most engineers would ever think of, like, or chemical engineers would ever think of. But that was, because of the location, it fit perfectly.
Yeah. So what happened after, like, so when you get there, tell us a little bit about, I mean, textiles from the outside perspective, it seems kind of boring, right? It's just like, it's just thread and yarn. But you're telling me that there was actually some surprising factors once you were actually inside the job. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, we're wearing shirts, we're wearing pants, all that kind of stuff. But that fabric is made of a yarn, which is made of a fiber, right? And so when you think about chemical engineerings and that, those particles that I was talking about earlier, that all goes into play, right? So you have, these fabrics that are, stretchy, or that are stiff, and on the opposite end of that are stiff, or you have flame retardant, or you have, like, now you have bounce sheets out there that are anti-static. And it's all of these things go into play to make the textile perform the way that it does. I've been at conferences where folks are talking about the technology that goes into, like, Lululemon apparel, and they're talking about the antimicrobials that they use to prevent the buildup of body over time. And now you would think, oh, well, that's fairly simple. I'm just going to throw it into the wash. Well, I guarantee you that if that technology was not actually in your apparel, over a period of time, it doesn't matter how you wash it, that smell is not coming out. And so it's these changes in technology over time that have really, or that I get to see and be a part of, that are just really cool, that from the outside, it just looks like a shirt. And, I guess for Sunbrella, it's looking at their cushions and you're like, oh, well, it's just a cushion. But is it? Because when you're sitting on it, it's soft. Well, that softness isn't just because of, how that yarn is made. That's just a piece of it. There are so many other things that go into making things look and feel the way that they do. That's something I would never have thought of.
Gotcha. Okay, so it's pretty complex. You do an internship with Glen Raven. Now, what made you actually want to stay there? What was, like, kind of the big deciding factor about why you wanted to stay at that job and continue working there full time?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, when I was, going through my internship, it was August, and I was going back into school to start my senior year. And it was at that point I was like, well, I've got to find a job before the end of the year. Like, that was my goal. Me and my buddy, we were just, like, trying to get a job before the end of the year. And you have every other engineer that's applying for all those same jobs that you are. And it's like, you see somebody getting an acceptance letter or somebody else getting a job. And it's like, in the back of my mind, I was always like, Glen Raven was actually, kind of fun. Like, I learned the people, I learned the job. Um, and so, I always had that in the back of my mind, like, that's something I want to do. And so, I got an offer to go up to a company in Connecticut, and they were like a consulting firm for the, kind of like that metallurgical side of things. And I was just like, it's really cold up there. I don't really think that I want to live up there. And even though the money was good, it was just not enough to overcome the idea that I don't think I'm going to be happy up in the New England area. And so that was why I decided to, start exploring around here. And, location is important. It's probably one of the most important things, like to be able to do the activities that you like, when you're not at work. Because even though you're there 8 hours a day, 9 hours a day, whatever, you still have to live there. And I think that's the biggest thing. Like with engineering, especially in chemical and process engineering, you may find yourself in the middle of nowhere, and you have to figure out if that's something you actually really want to do.
Right. That makes sense. And so like if you're not in a good location, you're just going to end up getting burnt out anyway.
Right.
So that makes complete sense to me. Now I want to go through, okay, talk to me about the progress of working through the job, right? When you started out in the internship versus now, you said you've been there for 6.5 years. So what does that process look like, kind of breaking it down by different phases?
The first thing is like when you're coming out of school, at least for me, I was really like, I'm fresh with this. I know everything that there is to know about chemical engineering. And when you walk out of that, walk out of those doors, it's like, but I know nothing about textiles, absolutely nothing. And so the thing was, for me, is I had to learn an entire industry and that has been around, for centuries, right? Like, textiles is one of like the oldest, technologies that's known to man, right? And you have to learn all of that, like the history, the science, and yes, you have your core principles, but that does not help you with the mechanical actions of that's going on. And so my internship was really more focused on that chemical side, so utilizing my background to look at their care and cleaning instructions. So if you get a stain on your couch, you need to be able to get that out. And so some of the things that they were recommending was, really like that dated stuff. And so what I needed to learn was how can we use some new stuff that's on the market to fix that. And so it was learning the product and how it interacts with other things. So that's really learning the company at that point. And then once I got the job, it was okay, well, let me look at the unit operations that are here. So you have, everything from yarn manufacturing to, chemical finishing and all of the things in between. And so since my focus was on the fiber and polymer side of things, it's really the nitty gritty of, what happens when you're doing this thing to this material to get this end product. And so it took a long time just to learn. First, you had to learn the product, like you learn the end piece. And then you're learning all of the things that make it happen. And then at the same time, you're trying to learn the things that actually make it. Like, so very at the very small level. So it took a long time to just learn all of that.
So
It's going to
how
school.
long would you, yeah, how long would you say just that initial part, just to even learn the product? How long do you think that took roughly?
I mean, learning the product took like, the 3 to 6 months. I mean, it doesn't take that long to, if you spend your time, I mean, you can learn something like that fairly quickly. But learning how to make it and all that kind of stuff and be good at that, like to the names of the processes and all that kind of stuff. I mean, that's a year to 2 years, I think.
So it's like two years more or less just to even kind of learn what are all the different parts in the systems. And then so what happens after that point of that first 2 years of just kind of figuring out how everything works? What's the next phase?
Well, so I think, after that first 2 years is where I was given the freedom to pick what I was interested in. And at the time, that was yarn extrusion. And so that is making the yarns that go into the fabrics. And so that's again focusing in on what I knew and liked was that polymer side of things. And so we put me over there, and then I managed to transition a material, got really close with those floor operators, with the whole process, and learned it from the inside out. So it was not just a big picture type of thing. It was like, you actually turn this knob to make it do this thing. And so it took me probably another year and a half to 2 years focusing squarely on that to be at the point I am now, the subject matter expert in that space. And so if people need something done, I'm the person that they go to for that.
Gotcha. So I guess I've got a couple of key takeaways that I'm hearing here from you right now. Is like, first and foremost, think about what is the core function of the job that you're actually going to be doing. You started off in aluminum. That was just going to not be a work environment you were interested in. You move over, you get to work in textiles, and you actually feel that, hey, I'm actually getting to do some of the things that I'm actually interested in. It's a cool work environment. The other thing seems to be a theme related to time. So if you go in there thinking from day one, you're going to be starting to work on these projects and having this huge impact in the company, that's just maybe not a realistic expectation.
I mean, and it really depends upon the company, but I would say that more often than not, you're not going to, most times, especially if you're an intern, you're just not going to be given those opportunities, because you have to think, a company is taking a risk by hiring you. They're going to be taking more risk by giving you like a big picture job. And so companies, should be looking at you to pick up projects to help you learn. I mean, the goal is for them to, for you to succeed, but you have to, help them help you, kind of thing. And that's by learning as much as you can, as quick as you can, so that they get comfortable and you get comfortable with what you're doing.
Yeah, that makes sense. So the next section that I want to go into is kind of pros and cons. What do you like about the job? What are things that maybe are not the highlights of the job? So let's start with the pros.
Right. So, the biggest pro, I think, is the flexibility. And I think with COVID happening right now, companies are looking at so much more flexibility than they ever have before. But even before COVID, Glen Raven has been one of the most flexible companies that I've ever heard of or ever worked for. And if that means, I need to leave at lunch to go home and work on a project with a contractor on my house or something like that, then there's no questions asked. Like, I can go home and do that, and they know that I will make up the work that I'm missing, or that I'll work from home. And that was before COVID made working from home kind of the thing that everybody does now.
Right.
And so it's that flexibility and trust that was something that came out very early on, that was like, this is the culture, I think, is the word that I'm trying to describe.
Was that pretty
Is,
apparent when you were in your internship, like that was kind of what the company was like?
yeah. And you can get a real feel for culture very early on. You either, you know, they say that you can either like your coworkers. I mean, you're obviously going to have some sort of conflict resolution, but the feel of work and the environment, you learn that, at least I could pick that up fairly quickly, that all of the people I liked, and Glen Raven does a really good job about making sure people fit in. They, I think that the interviewing process is more about who you are as a person than it is about what you know.
Gotcha. So, okay, let's keep going with pros here. What else? What else do you like?
So again, one of the things I got to do very early on with that trust and respect was I got to travel. So
Was this
and
just domestic, or like where'd you get to go?
so I mean, I've traveled all across the U.S. With me being in research and development, I got to go to technical conferences, international and domestic. I've been to Germany to work on large projects, as well as France. And those that was happening early on in my career. In the first 2 to 3 years, I was being introduced to our vendors and being able to have relationships with these folks and trusted to have conversations at very confidential and proprietary levels that most people just don't get to have, at this point. And so I will say that that kind of leads me to my next point is the size of the company. And that is something that some people, again, with the culture, you figure out, do you want to be a part of a small company or a big company? And, where I'm having conversations, like you said, with operators on the floor and vice presidents of the company in the same day. And, the decisions that I'm making now directly impact the direction that we choose to go. And that is something that somebody in a bigger company, you might kind of get lost in all of the names. Like you might just be communicating to your boss in your department, but I communicate across the functions. And so that's something that I like, is being, in that, I guess, small to mid-size company.
Okay,
So I
cool.
think that's a big one.
All right, so let's go to the flip side of the equation. What are some things that maybe you don't like so much about the job or about the job type industry?
Mm-hmm. So, size is both good and bad. And so with it being, smaller, uh, the opportunities for, that promotion that you really wanted, or that growth, like if that's something that you're, like me, I was pushing very early on, really aggressively. Like I had a 5-year plan that I was going to be a manager. Like that was my goal. Like in 5 years, you want to be a manager. And with small companies that may not happen, and you have to be, like as companies look to flatten out the administrative roles and empower people at lower levels to make the decisions that they're making, you don't have as many layers of bureaucracy to deal with. And so that can be a little bit of a downside on the career growth like track. So if you wanted to manage people, that option may not happen, because you're going to have folks that have been there for 20 plus years that they're not going anywhere. And so that's, if I was ever at a point where I was looking to move on, that would be tough. um, I'll say the next downside is that within engineering, you're not a your job is not as flexible as being a IT or programmer or something like that. Once you start to learn your skill, so textiles is a very small part of US production. And so if you learn to be a development engineer in textiles, well, if I ever got laid off or something like that, finding a backup job would be, could be difficult. And so that's something that, flexibility in your career is something to think about.
Gotcha. Yeah, so that makes sense, right? Just based on the time frame you were talking about earlier, takes a couple of years to even figure out all of the unique aspects of the company and the products that you're working on. So that would be much more difficult. You'd have to kind of start over completely, almost from a new role and a new perspective. So
Yeah.
the last thing that I want to bring up is, and I want to talk about is, okay, what tips or what advice would you have for people who are just getting started out? Maybe they're younger engineers. What's the one thing that you wish you could have told yourself looking in hindsight?
Right. Yeah. I mean, if I was to flash back to when I first got this job, I would tell myself to be patient. You know, I came up with a very aggressive goal, like I just mentioned, with being a manager in 5 years. I don't know where I got that number from,
Yeah.
but it's patience with yourself. I came out of school thinking I knew a lot of things about chemical engineering, and I did. But at the same time, giving yourself time to think about that email that you're about to send, or that problem that's been bothering you for a week at a time. Patience will let you think about who do you need to ask that question to get you some new perspective on it, as well as your own career goals, right? Like if you're too aggressive, that can come across as really negative. And I think that one of the things that I learned early on is that people appreciate you giving them leverage, as well as giving yourself some. So patience with people, patience with yourself goes a very long way.
Makes a lot of sense. And I think that's one of the things, you and I, we've known each other for quite a while now, and we're on the younger side. And so it's like, I feel like every year that I get older, time kind of stretches out, you get a little bit more perspective. But when you're still in college, or maybe even before college, everything just feels like it's taking so long. And 5 years seems like an eternity. But I'm sure you would agree that even the past 6 years at Glen Raven, I'm sure they've just kind of flown by. And now you're like, well, what's another six? And so it really puts it in perspective.
Right, exactly.
Well, Nick, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a really great episode. Guys, if you enjoyed this episode, please go ahead and give us a like, give us that thumbs up for the YouTube algorithm. And if you have any questions that you want to drop down below, either based on chemical engineering or working for a mid-sized company, anything that you might have, drop it down in the comments below, and we will try to do our best to respond to them. And thanks so much for joining in today. Thanks so much, everybody. See you later.
Thank you.